Hello and welcome along to a very special edition of the Sports Pundit meets the Attention Shift podcast. And I'm in the driving seat today. The power. We're fresh off the back of Speakers Only, which is Sports Pundit's annual gathering now. I think we can call it an annual gathering, don't you, Andy? And so we are going to take a look back on what has been a really interesting busy couple of days. I'm sure Andy is ready for the weekend and to put his feet up. But I'm going to come to you first, Andy. Edition 2 of Speakers Only, brought to you by Sports Pundits. Tell us just a little bit. Go back. Give us a little bit about the history and why you pulled this thing together, and how's it been different with Edition 2?
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you, Joe, for being part of yesterday, and also to Ed for his support across the 2 days, and the whole display team, alongside the other partners. In terms of Speakers Only, the concept came from attending various other events around the sports industry and feeling like there was a way to create something more interactive. I really love the idea of Sports Pundit being kind of a bridge, I guess, between generations. And I feel like because of where I am from an age perspective, I can kind of both talk to the younger generation and to the more senior leadership. And so, yeah, trying to like facilitate, I guess, that kind of like cross-pollination of ideas between both like the younger execs and also those more senior execs was kind of the main objective. And then in terms of pulling it together, I guess the other part to it was like Sports Pundit already hosts social events fairly regularly in London and in a few other cities. We've done a few in Manchester and hopefully we'll do more. But the idea here was like, if we're going to do something that's going to be content focused, like what I quite often say when I go to a conference is like a lot of the content you could consume via a podcast or a newsletter. So if you're going to be there and you're going to be live and you're going to be in the room with people, how do you create something that can only be done because of the people in the room? So kind of creating that additional interaction was quite important. I didn't want it to be monologues from the front and everyone else just sitting back and listening, because there's nothing worse than going to an event and you're sat next to someone you really want to talk to and you don't get the chance because the guys on the stage won't stop talking.
Normally I do that and then get shushed by the person in front of me.
Exactly.
So it was great not to feel like I was going to get shushed this time.
Yeah, and then I guess hopefully I've done an okay job there of explaining the concept. Speakers Only kind of speaks for itself in terms of the name. The idea is that there's 50 attendees. Each one is on a panel. There's 10 panels of 5. So every person speaks at some point, and that therefore kind of levels the playing field in terms of like no one's better than anyone else, in terms of like, you know, quite often there's almost that segregation, I guess, between the speakers and the guys that have paid to attend. The fact that no one's paid and the fact that everyone is a speaker kind of levels the playing field in that regard and allows me to be kind of like the curator, I guess, of like exactly who's in the room and who gets to be interacting with who.
Yeah. Are you Ed, were you there last time, or was this time your first time?
This was the first time for me this year.
Okay, so I'm going to come to you then, because I have had the pleasure of attending both editions of Speakers Only. And that is one of the things that really comes across to me is it feels very democratic in terms of everybody's voice and opinion is valid. It's, you know, what's said in the room stays in the room. So you can be quite candid and quite open. But that changes the whole vibe. Did you pick up on that at all?
Totally, yeah. I mean, look, there were some very senior people in the room and some middle seniorities and some people not starting out their careers, but at the very much work stages. But it didn't feel like there was any hierarchy. It felt like when you were in those group discussions that everyone's voice could be heard. Now, look, naturally, some people I'm going to talk loads, right? That's just me. Naturally, some people are going to talk more than others. But I felt like people were really trying to bring people into the discussion if they weren't talking, because you understood where they were from, the roles they were doing. And I think everyone was making an effort to try and get them involved in the discussion.
Yeah.
What the reality is like, as an older leader, right? I do see it as my job to try and help the younger leaders to Well, they're all going to make mistakes, right? And mistakes is part of learning, but hopefully make a few less mistakes than I've made in my career.
It's about what I really like is that knowledge transfer. Because with the best will in the world, Ed, you and I, if Andy's talking about a bridge, we're over the other side of the bridge. Andy's somewhere in the middle, and, and the younger people are on.
Andy's making sure we get everybody across.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a nice analogy because there is a knowledge transfer that goes on. I certainly found that in my group. I can see why you put me and Ed in different groups, by the way, or else they wouldn't be able to get a word in edgeways. But I could see that in my group, there were times when I was talking about stuff, and I mean, what was lovely is there was nodding and there was engagement, and they were like sponges, kind of the younger cohort amongst us. But then equally, I'm absolutely fascinated by what they've got to say. They've got a perspective that I don't have. And that knowledge transfer is really lovely. And what was great actually was this breakout format, because again, there's nothing worse than going to a conference and your bum starts getting a little bit numb because you've been sat on your chair for 2 hours and you've been talked at, as Andy said. Whereas there's a nice fluidity to this because you're getting up, you're going into your breakout groups, and then you come back and you sit down and you hear other perspectives. And was that something that you planned consciously, Andy, or is that something that just kind of evolved as you were thinking about this thing?
Yeah, I actually don't know exactly where I got the idea from. But the idea for breakout groups was new this year. Last year, it was slightly longer panels of 45 instead of 30. This year, it was 15 minutes of breakout discussion before the panel started. And then you went through into the breakout groups. And I tried to make it so that there was like one representative, I guess, of each breakout group on the panel so that there was like ability for everyone to get their point across. Last year, I was trying to point out people in the crowd to kind of bring them in. And I did that a little bit this year as well. But I felt like having that breakout group meant that everyone got to say their piece before we went up on stage. And it also settled people's nerves a little bit that were going up onto the panel, because even if they were a bit stuck on ideas, they got to consult with 10 other people or whatever before they went up. So they had their own ideas to bring to the table, but they could also then lean on the other people in their group and kind of share their ideas if there was something that that came up that was fresh, like a fresh idea for them. The only other thing to say is, Joe, you're in a very unique position. I think other than yourself and I think Jamie Core is the only other person that was there last year.
Wow.
Made the conscious effort that no one got invited back. And obviously yourself and Jamie were exceptions to that because you host the Sports Pundit Media and Marketing podcast respectively. But like that was also a kind of an idea that I was really keen to stick to, because I think it's so easy to kind of insult people. If you invite half the group back and not the other half, everyone starts to question what they did wrong.
Yeah.
And so I was really keen that, like, in order to kind of like keep that rule in place, it allowed for, 50 new people to enjoy the event. And then there'll be reunion events where last year's attendees and this year's attendees will now be able to kind of like congregate, almost like alumni network kind of vibe. Like class of 24 and class of 25 can now kind of get together and meet up kind of throughout the year at various events.
You're certainly focused on community, aren't you? I mean, that's something that comes up a lot when we're chatting, something that you started with Sports Pundit, with the newsletter, now there's podcasts, now these events. Ed, as someone who was there for the first time, but we talk about community a lot when we're chatting, how important is it in the sports industry to build that community, particularly when you've got younger entrants into the industry? They might not necessarily walk into a job. There's going to be more that are consultants, or I call it CEO of me, than perhaps when we started our careers. So how important is it to build community for those new and younger execs that are coming into sport, in your view?
Yeah, I think massively important, Ryan. I think I chatted to a few of the younger leaders who were on panels, and again, they felt like they could be really open for the one. They were like, "Can I swear?" Like myself to go and do this. I'm like, look,
it's
right?
scary, isn't it? Going to conferences for younger people is often really scary and daunting.
And I said, look, I used to be exactly the same when I started doing it, and you don't become desensitized to it, but you learn how to manage your emotions. And I said, look, my way of managing it is I try and prepare as much as I can. The reality is most of what you prepare, you don't actually use in the end. But every time I don't prepare, I fail. And that old adage of, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Like, And so I talked a little bit about that. And I also said, I said, look, I've just been sat in groups with you and heard you talking about your subject matter. You know your stuff. If you feel uncomfortable or not sure, just maybe try and stay in your lane where you are comfortable. And then as you start to build that confidence, then you can start to open up and get out of your lane a little bit. So like, I love being able to do that. And I've had some great leaders down the years when I was younger that have done that for me too. And you're always trying to pay it forward. And I think what I like about what Andy's done is none of it ever feels like it's commercially motivated, what he's done with Sports Pundit. And I know he doesn't think like that at all. And look, things come off the back of that. Well, it always feels like it is authentic and it is about the community and it's community first. Because if the community doesn't work, the whole movement doesn't work. And I have gravitated more and more towards Andy and Sports Pundit because of that. Because you do go to these events and people do feel like they can talk openly.
Quite collegiate, isn't it? Yeah, it really did. And I thought it felt more collegiate this time around, perhaps, than last year. It just, I really enjoyed. I was in a group with Michelle and Sean, and remind me who was the lady who worked at Arsenal, and Emma. And it was fascinating speaking to them, just hearing about their viewpoints. I mean, we talk about the future of fandom in sport a lot, and I mean it's something that I looked at in my work with the Premier League on their future fan strategy earlier this year. But again, that's something that came up. I know Lee Radbourne, when he was discussing what he thought some of his takeaways were, talking about younger execs and how to get the next industry leaders to think about the future of the fan. And that's difficult to do if you're a long-term industry exec, right? Certainly what I thought was really interesting hearing from those younger execs is what their perception of the future fan is. And I know it's something that Lee Radbourne talked about in his talking head. So let's hear a little bit from Lee now.
I think I'm most excited to discuss where the future of the fan is going. There's lots of interesting talks around how do you get more resonance and how do you reach fans. So yeah, especially with having a younger audience here as well, that's really going to have some actual insights from people who are younger fans.
Viewing habits are changing. I know that what appeals to them is not necessarily what appeals to my generation or older generations. We got to listen to them. We got to do our research on them to actually be able to answer that question, rather than copying and pasting the same stuff and just clipping it down to 30 seconds on TikTok. Like, why aren't we creating the right content that actually appeals to them? We need to understand them.
I think, we should always be learning from, not just from the experienced people in the room, but also from them coming through. They're the ones who are actually using these new platforms, engaging with these communities. And I think knowing where they are, how they want to engage, and what's important to them is actually insight that's sometimes lost in the abyss of this industry.
I guess in terms of that learning from younger execs, one of the points, I guess, of starting Sports Pundit when I did, I was fresh out of uni, working at an agency, small cog in a big machine. And when you're doing that research and insights, you're working for some pretty big clients, but not necessarily in an external facing role. So like you're only really meeting the same like 3 or 4 people on a day-to-day basis that you're working with. So part of it was like seeing all of the deals that were getting done happening because of relationships and not my research most of the time. And just realizing that like, well, actually, if you want to develop within the sports industry, a lot of it comes down to building that kind of like foundational relationship. So the newsletter was a way for me when I wasn't as confident, kind of going out and like meeting people at events or talking to people, because obviously you can edit a newsletter infinitely before you press send. It was my way of like initially starting to build relationships and often like piggybacking on kind of like more senior leadership's ideas to begin with. And I think then going into 2 roles where I was working from home because of COVID, and also in much smaller organizations where the leadership teams were in different countries to me, creating those social events became quite important as a way to kind of like maintain like human contact with people. And I think there's probably that element with a lot of the younger execs now where maybe they're in the office one or 2 days a week rather than 5, and they're not necessarily getting the opportunity to shadow the kind of people in the more senior roles on a day-to-day basis. Because quite a lot of the learning happens from just kind of like seeing how somebody is going about their job.
Osmosis.
Osmosis, it's true. Listening to how people deal with conflict on the phone.
Hearing conversations that are happening around you that you're not necessarily part of, but are just happening, and how people are dealing with things is I was going to say that to add to what you were saying, and it's kind of like, I think if you think about young people coming in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, in and around that COVID time, that since COVID time, we have now gone to hybrid work, and lots of business are now hybrid work, and they don't get as, like, I guess when we were starting out, yes, we were doing probably longer hours too, which is not something I would advocate, but I think we just learned potentially faster at that point because we just had many more touch points than perhaps they get right now. And I think I'm very, very much an advocate of quality over quantity. So I'm not advocating that they necessarily need to be doing more hours but these kind of touch points because I think I had a few conversations like that where you sit down with someone, they see your public persona or the business public persona and think there are certain things. And then when you sit down and they ask you some questions, you're like, oh God, no, it's not like that. And you start to explain the nuts and bolts behind it, why you project things in a certain kind of way, and explain how you got to that mindset of doing it. Again, trying to help them to do that quicker than probably I managed to work out in my career.
Yeah. You hosted a panel, right? Tell us a little bit about that. What were you talking about, and what were the interesting things you found when you were in the group discussions beforehand, and then when you went up to talk at the front of the room?
Yeah, really interesting panel about the world of content, how content's being distributed, and obviously the fragmented nature of the world. That obviously is a thing that's close to my heart, as John knows from the Attention Shift podcast. And how we had Tom from Bundesliga, Alex from Spotify, Sam from Octagon, and Lottie from SailGP. And it was interesting to get different perspectives, right? Because you've got a big traditional sports league. You've got a startup sport, essentially. You've got a rights agency trying to navigate what the hell's going on with all of these different ways you can distribute now. And then you've got Spotify, become this massive media platform now, and being able to give all their different perspectives. So yeah, we talked a lot about the distribution models now, and ultimately about cannibalization versus actually just being very clever about distributing content to the right people in the right platforms. The creator economy now that's becoming this distribution. And Sam talked really interestingly how, Octagon are thinking about that now, and that they are starting to think about them alongside the legacy media companies, monetization and engagement. Because if you are starting to get that kind of reach and exposure, how are you then converting that back to your own then operated platforms? And in general, just platform strategy. So, it was fascinating for me just as a host of the panel to hear, I talk about a lot of stuff all the time, and then you go, does anyone actually agree with this, or is anyone actually doing any of this? And you find that actually there's a lot in common, and they're all very aware of each other, as it were, and understand that they all need each other.
Yeah, it's interesting because distribution came up in our group a lot, and particularly when you look at young people, and that's kind of my work, which you do. And you ask young people how many platforms they indulge their various fandoms on in any given day, and you'll get to 12, 13, 14 very quickly and easily. And that was really interesting hearing from some of the younger execs how perhaps there were different platforms, particularly social platforms, that were much more important to them as fans as well, which was really interesting. And I think we've got a clip coming up in a minute from Alessandro, who talked about understanding fans through social and different distribution touch points.
Biggest challenge in unifying fan data is ultimately that through social, we can't actually fully understand an individual's data. So right now, aggregation of kind of, let's say, an understanding of one's characters through usually a fan. But in the future, I think there's going to be new ways to do this across blockchain technology, across the gamification of sports. And I just think that there's a lot of new opportunities with AI as well on how we can improve data processes that to this point we haven't been able to see in sports. It's very cliche, but it's actually understanding how we address our fan every day. You constantly hear the statistic in life that, let's say a Manchester United has 600 million fans, but they're doing $600 million in revenue. As an example, $1 for every fan. Surely we can be doing more through targeted ads, through bespoke newsletters, through better inventory management on merchandise. And I just think it's continuing to improve how we know how to speak to our customer and reach them every day, because there's no better example of fandom than sports.
How do we get those to fans? Do we meet them in their native environments to drive our reach and engagement metrics? And what do we then own and operate as our own platforms to bring those audiences to our platforms of key value propositions, so we can capture data and nurture those people through to a conversion point, whether it's buying tickets with the organizer committee, if it's converting for some of our partners, or actually funding our own revenue streams such as e-commerce. So it's been really interesting to see how some of the people in other sports properties are building that ecosystem to deliver value out of their audiences. So we've built a data model which sits within our customer data platform, which looks at their contact information, their demographics, their interests. So that might be different sports, different teams, their behaviors, like where do they engage, how often do they engage, and all of their e-commerce and ticketing data. So we can get a nice unified view of our known fans, which we can then segment and push experiences downstream, whether that's email, push, paid media, web and app personalization. It's all built off a single source of truth. Getting the data is quite challenging because you have to have key value propositions to capture people's data. Like, how are you going to drag someone from a social environment where they're kind of casually consuming to an environment where they're going to give you their data, so you can then use that data to then commercialize them and carry on engaging them after that. So getting the value propositions is really key. You got to have a real point of difference to be able to drive people from one platform to another. But when you do capture that data, make sure that you really mine that first party data so you can drive better marketing and commercial outcomes from it.
The other bit that I think is quite important is, like, when you're looking from the outside at how sort of bigger rights holders are operating, it's very easy for mainstream kind of industry press to criticize that they're not doing enough, or to think that you have these like novel ideas that they're not considering. And a lot of the time, like, the people working in these organizations are incredibly smart and incredibly switched on to a lot of this stuff. It just takes them a bit longer to get from ideation to execution because of the nature of the size of their operation. And so, like, I think kind of understanding that nuance of the kind of governance, yes, within those institutions is quite important, because I think it's quite often you kind of see, maybe like thought leadership pieces where it will be quite critical sometimes of like a rights holder for not doing something, or for not understanding the impact of, I don't know, YouTube creators or animation or whatever it is. But like, a lot of the time they are thinking about these things. It's just it's quite as easy for them to go from having that concept to getting it live. And so like, from a few conversations I had, that energized a lot of people to kind of know that there are like really good people inside a lot of these institutions that are pushing for a lot of change. It's just not necessarily all visible yet. If you're not talking to them and not kind of inside those institutions. And I think that's quite a positive takeaway. I know, like, particularly a couple of people on the brand side that maybe don't work directly with rights holders anymore came up to me and said, like, oh, I'm really like enthused about the fact that we've got these people working in the industry and that they're going to be the ones trying to change things.
Yeah, and you're absolutely, and it's trying to, I mean, because look, I can imagine if you're the leader of let's say a huge rights holder, right? And you can look, we talk a lot about different distribution models, and I think it's always easy to say, legacy media is dead. Like, and you hear that a lot. And the reality is it's nuanced. That's not the case. It's just changed, right? We've now got more opportunity to get to people in different places. Because what was really interesting for me is I sat in a few sessions with some of the young leaders, and one or two of them said, I was talking about YouTube, as I often bang on about. And I went, I'd never go on YouTube. And I was like, well, you never go on YouTube? And I was a little bit taken back. No, I consume my content almost exclusively through Insta and TikTok. Like, okay, that's interesting then. And then I thought, so I learned, so then I sort of went deeper into it, and I learned a few things too. So if you can imagine if, a senior leader is being told that's where you need to be, and then you hear that and they think, so then often it's sometimes easy just to go, I'm just going to sit tight for a few more years and just see what happens. It's incredibly difficult.
It is. Change is hard. And even if you're agile in thinking, to Andy's point, you can't always affect change as quick as you'd like to, because there's governance structures, there's rights deals that might have 2 or 3 years left to run on them. So actually you're not allowed to do something. So what was really interesting for me is talking to the people in the room was, it is easy to default to that, oh, legacy media doesn't know what it's doing. But actually you do realize that there is a much more agility in thinking than you maybe understand. But there are blockers in the way. The important thing is to make sure that you push through them when the opportunity arises.
Yeah, and I think, look, the legacy media, I think they have huge processes, structures in place. So it's like any business in any sector, it's always going to be harder for them to move than the creator that's built an audience and can fail fast, learn and iterate literally day to day. That's the same in any industry that you would ever work in, right? And I think they're just having that similar kind of problem. But there are more, you see more and more now that are starting to learn and lean in, and more people coming into those organizations that have come from some of those other organizations where they do have to fail fast. It just take a bit more time.
That cross-pollination is important. And I do think that that's something that is, you see in action in that room. That's certainly one of the takeaways that I left with, is that cross-pollination. And actually Ryan Shelton of Como 1907 said a similar thing. Looking at adjacent industries, let's take off the blinkers and look broad, because there's learnings from execs that come out from outside of sport. I'm not a sport exec. I've come in from media and animation and video gaming. So, but actually that offers a different viewpoint given the operating context in which businesses like 1907 operate.
I think I would love to see other execs from outside of the sports industry and even sports adjacent industries. I think having Rob here this year is amazing for Meta. I think looking at other top tech platforms and other industries that can really help change the way we think as an industry and the way we approach our business, I think that would be very interesting. So someone from great partners that we have in Como with Uber, Revolut would be amazing, or other great tech platforms from Silicon Valley would be amazing.
What we can learn from the next gen of sports industry leaders is a much more open-minded approach to sport, and much more of a pull from other industries that, they've grown around in. Maybe a lot of them have been a lot more sophisticated in how they approach the fan-first environment and how they've kind of served them as individuals coming into those decision-making roles.
Well, I guess what I've enjoyed is we're so deeply entrenched in our job, talking to brands about their sponsorships, about understanding the sport itself and kind of like being an expert in the sport. The idea of media rights and understanding the entire complex network that you go into once you kind of look outside yourself as a brand has been like eye-opening for me. And like to hear kind of people talk about emerging sports and the work that they do, securing revenue streams for that, particularly without those media rights, has been so interesting.
I always really enjoy working with the young people that come into sport, because they come with fresh perspectives and they don't accept some of the problems that we older folk sometimes accept as fixed or unmovable.
Let's keep diversifying, becoming more inclusive, really listening to other industries and taking big learnings from them and bringing it into sport. I just think that is the right way to move, working with technology, content, rights holders, finance. So let's all just take all of this information from the different parts, bring it all together and just continue to expand sport globally and creating even more fun experiences.
I think sports has so much to learn from the different industry and vice versa. But I think we've probably fallen victim of that a bit too many times, because we can all learn from the entertainment industry. We can all, content is king, as they say these days, for example. So you shouldn't really be just learning from sports industries and sports organizations and how to drive your content strategy, right?
And I guess coming out of that clip, like the idea of kind of learning from other industries is something I've been thinking about for a while. A lot of the podcasts I listen to, other than obviously listening to The Attention Shift, are outside of are outside the sports industry, right? So like listening to podcasts like Acquired, where they're talking about how these like massive businesses have come to fruition. Or there's a podcast called My First Million by Sam Parr, who does The Hustle. And they're often talking about entrepreneurship and kind of like early stage businesses and like learnings from there, and like then taking that across to sports quite often is where I get ideas from, versus like always looking within the lane of where you're operating. And like I'm speaking at a conference at the end of November, which I'm like really excited about because it's not a sports conference, it's an innovation conference by a group called Patio Campus, and it's like everyone there is in like corporate R&D roles.
Yeah.
And I'm like really curious to hear what like the head of R&D from IKEA has to say, or like the head of R&D from like BMW or Iberia Airlines, because like quite often sport can afford to be slightly behind the innovation curve because of the loyalty of its fans, and so it doesn't have to be first to innovate on a lot of things. So actually, like one of the topics that I was most keen to get involved was like what can sport learn from brands when it comes to loyalty, and like that was one of the discussions. Because there's no reason that people should have more loyalty towards baked beans than they do towards a sports organization, right? But like, yet there's so many people that will only buy Heinz, or there's so many people that will only wear Calvin Klein underwear, and it's like, how have they leveraged that to create that loyalty? So yeah, 100% with Ryan in terms of what he's saying there, in terms of like, I would love to bring in more people from outside sport, and I've had an idea for a while of launching a newsletter called Off Course, which is kind of a play on words, but the idea would be like take a lesson from outside sport and then kind of apply it.
Yeah.
But I already have too many things on my plate, so I'll have to
Some time, Andy.
I might take that one from you, Andy.
we can do it together.
But it is interesting. That's one of the things that came up in our group. I was talking to, well, it was Michelle actually from Ireland. We were talking about Guinness and what can you learn from Guinness? Again, a brand that inspires such huge loyalty. I mean, and is part of culture. I mean, that's the Holy Grail.
I just felt letting the G recently has just become this like
yes, I mean,
physically, digitally.
TikTok. I mean, it's something interesting, and the value of in-person experiences was something that came up. And again, as someone who obsesses over media and screen-based behaviors, actually, what we do see amongst younger people is this push back towards in real life experiences. So they might be perennially online, but they're going to festivals again and live music. And even Netflix, the very definition of a tech screen-based media company, has created Netflix House, which is an in real life experience where you can go and engage with the big IP on Netflix. In a way, it feels like that's where sport has got an advantage and is at the front because it's built on in-person and in real life experiences.
Well, yeah, it's built for experiences, right? So then you can work out, how do you do the crossover? That absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that was the thing that really came across in my group too, talking about that cross-pollination.
Yeah, this is very public information, so I think I'm happy to share this. But obviously, Guinness are launching their brand home in London very soon. I think it's going to launch early December.
Yeah.
And like the Guinness Storehouse in Dublin is like I think the number one tourist attraction in Ireland.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
And I always think like the Premier League has a huge opportunity to build like a hall of fame in the center of London, and like all the tourists that would want to come and get photos with the Premier League trophy or a past previous legend of the Premier League. So I think that kind of like physical in-person experience is really interesting. And then just to jump on your point around digital to physical, you weren't there on day 2, Joe, but Fraser from the RNA was there. And he spoke about another public case study. So happy to share it because I know that it's something that they've already shared very publicly. Is, the case study that they did where they created a game on Roblox where if players had played that game, I know you're going to love this, Joe.
I know. This is my favorite case study.
Yeah, playing the game on Roblox then earned them rewards where they could go and play Top Golf in Jakarta. And they're now rolling that out across, I think, Thailand and a few other locations across Asia, which was, I think a lot of people were really like, firstly surprised that the RNA was like at the forefront of this kind of like innovation curve.
Yeah.
And Fraser challenged anyone, if anyone had done it before them, but I think they're the first, right? So
they are the first to do it. And really the importance of that is not to be underestimated. It's something that's very close to me because I've done a bit of work with the RNA on their Roblox experience. And that it's very easy to demonize video games and Roblox as being incompatible with sport and sports participation. But they were the first to create a data point to say, we know that those that completed this challenge on Roblox then went and picked up a golf club in Top Golf. And actually, a huge number of them went back for a second hour. I think it was about 85% of them then went back for a second hour. So you've got Top Golf who were thrilled because they brought families and they sold more food and beverage. But then you've got a data point that says, not only have we inspired participation, but then repeat trial. And that might be the beginning of a lifetime's love of golf. So it's really interesting case studies like that. And though the RNA, they sometimes hide their light under a bushel. I know I've posted about it before, and then you put it in your newsletter. That challenges a lot of people's assumptions. Even just chatting to Fraser on day one, and I spoke to a few people and said, did you know that they'd done this? And people were like, no, my gosh, that's amazing, because they've now got that data point. And that's the kind of conversation that wouldn't happen unless they were in that room. This week. So I think that is certainly something that I take away, is when that light bulb goes on and they go, whoa, I never knew this kind of thing was happening.
Yeah, it was built upon on day 2, because one of the final panel of day 2 was around participation as a form of fan engagement. And a big part of that discussion ended up being like, what is participation? Because like Michael Hay, who's the chief marketing officer at Sixes, where we hosted day 2, saying like there's more people that play sixes every year than play, cricket on a grass wicket. And ultimately, like, that's a driver of participation. And like, there's a lot of parallels. He spent 10 years, I think, at Top Golf previously. And he remembers the early days of Top Golf when they only had 6 locations where, golf institutions laughed them out of the room and said, that's not golf. Right. And now it's like, anything where it's a club hitting a ball is like a touch point into golf. Vansa, who just hosted the Sports Pundit finance podcast with Old Tom Capital, where they're investing in kind of like the golf ecosystem. Like, they talk about this a lot, like this kind of like golf culture and kind of like these kind of like lighter touch points into golf, like screen golf is another one where it's like an opportunity to kind of merge physical and digital, break down the barriers, create that entry point, have someone competing from the other side of the world. A bit like how Zwift does with cycling, or Strava with running. Like, there's all these opportunities to kind of like reduce that entry level for participation, because ultimately that drives so much of fandom.
What I think we should do now, because we've been talking for a while, so let's hear from some of the attendees now. Let's put together a bit of a montage, and let's hear from some of the attendees from Sports Pundit over the last couple of days.
The event is great for bringing together different sports and, rights holders, agencies, tech people. I love the format. Everybody who is here is speaking, and that's super unique.
My closing message to the sports industry is to have more events like this, which are probably more interactive, less formal, bringing together different people from different backgrounds and different experiences. And, I'm just passionate about continuing to learn, but also to help the next generation, but also to listen to other people's perspectives. So that's, it's been a brilliant event for that.
I'm a massive fan of diversity of thought. I think for too long, sport's been stuck in its old ways. We've always done the same thing. It works. It doesn't work now. So I think having that fresher feel about it is really great.
Just looking forward to hearing the perspectives of the diverse audience that I think Andy and his Sports Pundit and Speakers Only communities bring together. It's, as I say, diversity is the word. They're from different sectors, different parts of the sports industry, different territories, people from the non-sports industry, and it's that opportunity to hear perspectives, ideas, and experiences that I think are outside of a lot of the mainstream commentary. That's one of the things I always get from the podcasts and the media from Sports Pundit, and amazing to be here in person today to meet people in person and have those discussions.
My message to the sports industry: keep letting young people in, keep giving them support. It's obviously a really hard industry to break into. Just give people more chances, more hope. You never know who's going to crop up out of nowhere and be the next gen leader or whatever. So yeah, keep opening those doors.
What is one exec I want to see at the next Speakers Only event? I think what's great about this is it's different. So actually it'll probably be someone I don't, because I think a lot of the people that I want to hear I've heard.
My message to the industry would be to always be agile in your thinking, to challenge yourself, to at least consider the option that is the opposite of what your initial thought would be.
I think the most interesting conversations at Speakers Only have been from the real, I suppose, diversity of people that are here, their backgrounds, who they work for, from a data analytics specialist to content publishers and creators to strategists at rights holders. the combination of all of the brilliant brain power that the people here today are bringing has made me I'll be leaving here with a lot to think about, certainly in how we reach, recruit and engage audiences.
One word: change. It may not want to say it, but I think it's been quite static over the years, and it relies on broadcast, sponsorship and tickets. But I think there's a tipping effect, a domino effect that's going to happen whether sport likes it or not. And I think that my closing message would be to embrace change.
Speakers Only has included a rich diversity of different topics and people coming from all areas of the business. And that's been terrific. Life is a permanent learning opportunity. And just by hearing their experiences and how they're going about tackling the challenges that are facing them and the opportunities that they're looking into, it's important also to be there to help try to guide them and give them some insights with experience.
The thing I most enjoyed is, I guess, not a specific topic, but just the openness of the people that are here, and also people from a variety of different roles in content, media, technology. So you've got vendors here, you've got rights holders, you've got brands, sponsorship, activators. I think everyone's been incredibly open to talk about their successes, but also their challenges. And there's been a real sense of collaboration and people trying to help each other come up with answers to questions that probably they weren't quite sure how to answer.
I think day one was incredible for me because it was super content and media focused. So it was really interesting to hear, I live in Spain and work in Spain, to hear how people in different countries, especially here in the UK and also Germany, have been using content to sort of grow brands and how to reach new audiences. So that's been great. But also today, listening to the venture capital things has really been like quite eye-opening for me, and just sort of understanding more of the business side of sport.
I think my final message after being here for 2 days is just we all need to continuously learn. It's all about understanding what's happening in the future, having that desire to learn, and also having a growth mindset.
Honestly, I think it was just kind of the different vibes there were to it and kind of the different setup to your regular events and conferences that you usually go out to in the sports industry. I think this kind of unique setup and even just the little concept of the breakout sessions just before the panels, it allowed you to gain some really good insights, but also just to kind of bond with different people, because usually, it's not so easy in similar events just because also they're a bit more salesy and a bit more driven in that sense.
To finish, Ed, just give us a summary of your takeaways. Tell us what you really enjoyed about it and what is any improvements to be made.
Really enjoyed the breakouts before we did the panels themselves, because I went into it thinking, this is going to be a little bit like speed networking, and it actually wasn't like that at all. And as soon as I'd done my first one, it invigorated me for the rest of the 2 days. So loved that addition. And like I said, I didn't have last year's experience, but I think that worked really, really well. And I think it helped everyone at every level to feel comfortable right off the bat. And I think it then drove conversations outside of those individual groups that we're in as well. I think what was good as well is like seeing people from different work areas, almost like cross-functional, talking to other people that they wouldn't normally talk to. Like you see, seeing brands talking to a company like us, talking to a rights holder that they wouldn't have talked to before about the kind of things they wouldn't normally do, but then realizing actually there might be different kinds of opportunities outside of what they do. And everyone was tremendously open. I think that's the thing that hit me right from the first hour. And I could see right then it was going to be a great 2 days. I think the only thing I would change, Andy, is like those groups. I think it might be good actually to change them a bit on the second day, so you mix it up a little bit more than we have to, just to force more people to speak together in groups. But again, it worked. There's nothing I'd change, and I think it was really, really good.
Amazing. Yeah, I would concur. But Andy, I'm going to come to you. You get the chance to sign off. Tell us you're likely exhausted, but after the couple of days, how are you left feeling, and what are the plans for next year if you've got that far yet?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm just really grateful that everyone took the time out of their schedules. I think, asking very busy executives to take a day or 2 days out of their schedule to come to Wembley and not just speak on that panel, but I think they pretty much all stayed the full day, got engaged and stuck in on every panel. So that's like a point of pride, I guess, is that like those people were willing to come together and like really get stuck in and kind of like a lot of the time it was, you know, people that are already part of the Sports Pundit community, and they're agreeing to do that because there's an element of trust that's been built up. And so, you know, I really appreciate that they took that risk, I guess, to take a day off or 2 days off from work in order to come along, and hopefully that decision to do so has been vindicated for most of them. In terms of future plans, I think we'll probably be hopefully back at Wembley again next year, and that will become the home of it. The other opportunity is, thanks to Global Institute of Sport having campuses around the world, as the name would suggest with the global. I would love to take a version of this to both Australia and the US. So the goal is to launch within a Global Institute of Sport campus. They have ones in Melbourne and Sydney. They have ones in Miami for sure, and I think maybe also Toronto. I'm not necessarily going to do all those locations, but to do one in North America and one in Australia would be amazing. And obviously we had Alex come over from. He's the writer of a really good newsletter called SponCon, as well as working at the New York Mets. And you know, he flew over from New York, which is an incredible effort from him. I hope he had other stuff to do as well, and it wasn't just for me. But yeah, he and a lot of other people that follow Sports Pundit in the US, I would love to be able to engage with them and start to sort of build American audience, or turn that American audience into an American community. That was probably the next step.
Well, kudos.
Well done, Andy.
Commendations on getting through the second version of, or edition, I should say, of Speakers Only. We can't wait for the next one and the global edition. I mean, I like the scale of the ambition, Andy. So yes, well done. And you've been listening to this very special mashup of the Attention Shift and the Sports Pundit podcast, brought to you by Ed and Andy and me. And if you want to hear more about Speakers Only, I'm sure that some of the attendees will only be too happy to talk to you. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy.